Hey everyone, Garth here. Thanks for listening to Psych Sessions. If you could go to wherever you listen to our podcast and you would follow that podcast or like it, it really does help us as we are trying to get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, if you haven't checked out our website, please visit psychsessions.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We offer free resources and valuable news that you are going to want to know related to the teaching of psychology. Thanks.
But what really has been taking up the most of my attention is being a new dad. And that has been exciting, exhilarating, exhausting, all those things that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and have very intentionally started to dial things back in some of my professional spaces, just because these are periods of time, at least in my daughter's life right now, where she is at such a fun age. I'm never going to get those back.
You've just heard Blake Nielsen from Columbia College. Eric had the opportunity to sit down with Blake for this 244th episode of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. Hey folks, I want to talk about autism spectrum disorder. Specifically, I want to talk about how good testing can help adults get the help that they need. But first, a few statistics. Did you know that almost 62 million people worldwide would qualify for the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis? That's 1 in 127. And when we think about teenagers in the US, that's more than 50,000 youth a year who are going to be making that transition from childhood to adulthood with this diagnosis. And many of them are actually going to lose critical services at this time. So enter ASRS, that is the Autism Spectrum Rating Scale for adults. It's scientifically valid. It's a multi-informant rating scale from leading experts Sam Goldstein and Jack Naglieri, tailored specifically to adults in their unique presentation. And it identifies late emerging symptoms and the masking behaviors that often go unnoticed. It's perfect for classroom demonstrations or projects and for training. This test goes for real-world relevance to help people. If you want to learn more, head to mhs.com and check out the Education and Training Partnership Program, or simply click Contact Us to get more information. That is mhs.com.
I'm Nolan White, and I'm a STP member because it is the one organization since I started teaching that has provided the most value both in personal relationships and professional development to help me become a better teacher. It was also one of the first places in my experience as a member of APA that made the organization smaller and more closely knit and helped me just develop a lot of individual connections that have continued to help me be a better teacher. Highly recommend that you join STP.
Welcome to another episode of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. As always, I'm thrilled to be here, and I am here with Blake Nielsen from Columbia College. Hi, Blake.
How's it going, Eric?
It's good. Did you almost call me Garth?
Yeah, because we're just talking about Garth. So I really hope you leave this in because...
Oh, I will.
Yeah,
You'll
just to show the authenticity of this. But can I also say before we get started that I'm a longtime listener and first-time caller, and I've always wanted to say that in an official setting. So this is my moment to shine with that statement.
Well, first off, I appreciate that. I listen to a radio show that uses that phrase often, probably at least once a week. And so I love that phrase. And I want to put a pin in that and come back to it. Just before I gave the intro and after clicking on record, Blake was telling me about what he just got done doing today. And so we're sitting on December 2nd, 2025. So Blake, would you mind repeating? You just got out of class. What were you teaching and what happened?
Sure. Teaching quantitative research methods this fall. And I had the privilege really to walk students through how to put together a poster and ways in which they need to craft their narrative, walk the audience through, the introduction, methods, results, discussion, but really helping our students recognize the power of an elevator speech. How do we help them convey something that's really dense to an audience that maybe knows nothing about psychology? So,
yeah, what a great transferable skill. I mean, or actually, I think the skills people are calling them durable skills these days. But what a great skill! So I also teach research methods. I teach it Mondays and Wednesdays, and I do not do that because I'm not as fearless as you are. How many students do you have in your research methods class?
One of the reasons why I can do that, Eric, is that I often have small class sizes teaching at a liberal arts college here in Missouri. I'm at Columbia College in Missouri. I have anywhere from 10 to 15 students on average in that class, remarkably different than what many of my peers in the field have to face with research methods. However, I've listened to this podcast long enough to know that people like Regan Gurung out there will do a full-fledged project and have students do an IRB, collect data, write up their analyses, and have a finished product by the end of the semester. So I know it's possible even in larger settings.
Well, and so, for example, my class this semester has 37. So I have 37 students enrolled. The cap is 40. And first off, I'm no Regan Gurung. I've been wanting to say that on the podcast for a long time. And I do an in-class project where students write a small number of survey questions. We put them together in an omnibus survey. We use our Psych 101 subject pool. Because it's a demonstration project, it doesn't need IRB approval at my shop. And so students do get to build a complete boat from stem to stern of, title page, abstract, introduction, method, results, discussion, references, and a table. But I can't factor in the IRB. I just couldn't do it in a semester.
Yeah, it's tough. And I've served as our IRB equivalent chair at my institution.
Of course you did.
And with students that are navigating some of these really meaty projects, you have to be mindful of time. You have to be mindful of how long some of these members really need to look at the documentation before they provide approval. So yeah, it's a real constraint. And luckily, some of the things we're doing just stay in-house. So it's not something that we have to go get that larger approval for.
Yeah. So will any of your students take their work to like an MPA or an ILWA in your neck of the woods?
Well, look at you referencing some Midwest conference options right there. That's some nice Monmouth College reference even, some of the originators of the ILWA conference. A little shout out to Monmouth College and the Scots. Yeah, so that is...
Have we talked about Monmouth College already together?
I feel like we're about to get into it. You and I have mentioned it briefly in passing years past at the annual conference on teaching. I think the first time you and I had this conversation, I had just transitioned from a position that I had as an assistant professor at Monmouth College in Illinois to my current position at Columbia College in Missouri. And I, while there, was a part of a departmental conversation in which you were coming up on an important milestone and you were getting invited back to Monmouth College to speak. And so I was in that space where some of those initial deliberations were just taking place prior to my exit from the institution.
Yeah. So my backstory with Monmouth is that's where I graduated from with my undergraduate degrees. And so I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and speech communication and theater arts from Monmouth College in 1985. And so I was there decades before you were there. And I was Psychi International President 2017, 2018. And I actually finagled an invitation back because I wanted to bring it full circle. I was Psychi chapter president my senior year. And then I was Psychi International president 35 years later. And so it was, Monmouth College holds a special place in my heart. And so I saw that again reading your bio today. And I thought, we've got to talk about Monmouth College at least a little bit.
And I don't think I'm the first former Monmouth College faculty member that you've interviewed on Psych Sessions. No, I just happened to listen to one with John Gray, perhaps. And I noticed that in his bio, a Monmouth College link.
Yeah, before he landed at PLU, Pacific Lutheran, I think Monmouth College was his stop prior to that. Yeah, and so that's why I knew Iowa. My very first conference presentation was at Iowa.
Yeah.
I think they're like the 50th or 60th annual now. I think mine was the 12th or 13th annual. So
yeah. What a great conference to take students to. I had the pleasure of actually helping host ILWA at Monmouth while there, and just loved getting my students involved in that process. And you know, you have a lot of admiration towards Monmouth. I do too. I mentioned this to my colleagues while there. Like, that was one of those spots where I could have spent my entire career and been extremely happy. It just so happened that my family situation wasn't one that allowed me to stay at Monmouth.
Sure.
But an amazing institution.
APA Publishing wants to give you 15% off your order. If you teach classes like counseling, clinical psychopathology, or multicultural psychology, then this is for you. APA Publishing has books that are written by experts that are grounded in evidence and really help teachers. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a book they have right now called Helping Skills. It's in its 6th edition, and it gives students clear, practical frameworks for understanding and learning counseling techniques. It's perfect for hands-on practice and skill development. Here's another one. Cultural Humility helps students build self-awareness and engage meaningfully across diverse identities and experiences. So head to apa.org because they want to give you 15% off your order today using code PS15. That's capital P, capital S, 15. Go check out APA Publishing.
So, Blake, I'm a little confused. Is Columbia a 2-year school or a 4-year school? What space does it live in?
Great question. We started that way as a 2-year institution. Actually, let's take it a step back. We were about to celebrate our 175th birthday.
Wow.
Where we started, back in the 1800s, and it started as a institution that educated women, and it was women that often were daughters from some of the faculty members that were teaching at the University of Missouri. And so we, for several, let's fast forward it, over 100 years, were primarily, an institution for women, a 2-year institution. And then in the 1970s, they went co-ed, and then it went up to a 4-year degree serving institution. And since then, it also changed names. So it was previously called Christian College and then became Columbia College of Missouri.
Okay. So is it religiously affiliated?
It was. So it technically still does have its religious affiliations. We see that in some spaces, but not often. I feel like, back to our former conversation about Monmouth, that a religious affiliation was well known. We often have the reverend that showed up in all of our faculty meetings.
On vacation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so that has not been my experience at Columbia College, and that it's more of it, part of its rich tradition and history.
Yeah, in another lifetime, I interviewed at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, and I was raised Southern Baptist, and so at some level, I could fit into that Baptist culture. But they were serious about it. It wasn't name only; it was taken very seriously. And so, different universities have that different levels of what they adopt, and then there's donors and there's alumni and traditions and all of that stuff. So, Blake, how long have you been at Columbia?
I started in 2017, and kind of a fun way for me to remember that was during my new faculty orientation, we took a pause midday and we all went outside. We put on some special glasses, we laid down in the grass, and we watched a solar eclipse. And so the days that I started at Columbia College just so happened to be the 2017 eclipse, and that's been one of my fun memories and little markers of when I actually started at Columbia College. So about 8 years.
That's a very trusting cadre of new faculty members, to trust these people taking you out on the lawn and laying you down on the grass. I mean, in my world, that's an HR situation sometimes. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, lucky
Good
for
for
me,
you.
I was laying right next to my dean, and we both, we're sitting up there gazing at the sun, just waiting for that eclipse. So that we cannot stress how awesome that experience was. I know we're getting a little off track here.
no, you're fine.
But that's one of my things I get really excited about. Stargazing, getting excited about eclipses. I did not get to see the most recent one. Columbia was in a partial eclipse path where we still got some of the shadow that came from the most recent eclipse. But yeah, what an amazing experience, right? And what a nice way to celebrate my beginnings here at Columbia College.
And something obviously very memorable and important to you.
Which, it's funny. I know you and I perhaps have talked about this again, maybe in passing at the annual conference on teaching, but it's stories like that help bring home some of the concepts in classes. Stories often for me are ways that I love to start class. Today, at the time of this recording, I just came out of this research methods class and I started class off with a story, and I did all that and really reshaped how I approach my classes based on a talk that you gave at an annual conference on teaching years ago in Denver.
Wow.
And the reason why I can remember this is the power of story, because you talked to us in that session about why storytelling is an important pedagogical tool and the ways in which we can, use it in the classroom space. But I also remember the story that you shared that really highlighted the power of story. And you were talking about coming upon the scene of an accident and how you were able to walk people through the differences between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems, how your heart was racing, right? And that's a talk that you gave, almost over a decade ago, if not a decade ago. And I still remember that. And I started doing storytelling after that. I had students that years later will come to me and say, hey, do you remember in social psychology when? And they'll repeat to me the story that I shared.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, that's because of a great ACT talk that I had where I was able to see the power of story.
Yeah. First off, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And, I think it's one of these universals, right? I mean, I think all cultures are centered around stories. We're just coming out of Thanksgiving break. We're about ready to go into the holidays. And so when families gather together, they tell stories. Cultures tell stories. And so it's just so universal. And if for anyone, if they can become, and I like to think it's a skill that's acquirable, if you can become a decent storyteller, you can hold people's attention. And for me, it might, I'm 62 years old, and my students are not. And so for me, I can't tell stories about when I was a teenager because they weren't born. What is it? Textbook authors used to complain about, I can't use the Challenger explosion in my textbook anymore for a flashbulb memory because today's students don't remember the Challenger explosion, right? What is it? Today's students might not even remember 9/11. So,
No, they were born after.
Yeah. So when you can tell stories that are relatable, and for me, if there's a little bit of funny in them, that's even better, so.
And even stories that maybe aren't your own. Like I've found power in finding a story that is just so remarkable and a perfect tie-in to ethics. So, I'll listen. I'm a big podcast listener. Maybe that my clue at the beginning, long-time listener, first-time caller. I've been listening to you guys since things kicked off. And for me, the lessons that I've learned in hearing some of my peers across the country speak, those are great stories I can bring back into the classroom. Some of the other podcasts I listen to that maybe aren't psych-specific that go into something that does relate to ethics and why thinking about the Minnesota starvation study that took place and how you had individuals that, were starving themselves for science and why that is a important tie-in talking about ethics and consent and what is truly consent. And those are what students will remember later. And so I'm all for the story.
It's been lovely to have people on the podcast like Albert Bandura or Ellen Langer or Phil Zimbardo, who are famous people in psychology, tell their own stories. And, I remember Phil Zimbardo talking to Garth about testifying before Congress in the 1950s about television and the impacts that children's TV might have on kids developmentally growing up, and how he was torn by that. And that led to this social observation and this notion of, observing others vicariously could have beneficial or detrimental effects. And it was really cool to hear him tell the story from his own experience when he was an assistant professor at Stanford.
Kind of make a quick Monmouth College tie-in to that statement.
Blake, you can do anything you want.
So while at Monmouth, I was chatting with one of my colleagues, Sarah Gorchoff, and she was explaining to me how her father was a research assistant with Zimbardo in Stanford conducting that experiment. And, through just conversations with Sarah, through conversations with, her dad and some of the experiences, it was around that time that the Stanford Prison Experiment movie just released in theaters. Mm-hmm. And so we as an institution hosted a showing of that and then had her father, zoom in and share with us what it was like to be on the ground and have students be able to talk about that and really engage with somebody that was there on site was awesome.
Hi folks, let's talk about intro psych textbooks. They often tell our students what to learn, but they don't tell them how to learn. And that's why Norton has brought in award-winning teachers like Stephen Chu and Ebony Glover to join Sarah Grisson on the title Psychology in Your Life, with a new emphasis on critical thinking through their Impact Learning Science Framework. Impact is an acronym, and it consists of 6 of the most actionable learning science principles that students need to succeed. And for the first time, these strategies aren't just explained, they're interactive. So as your students are learning course content, they're also practicing skills like monitoring, attending, and thinking critically, using the study tips that feel most helpful to them. And the result is that students don't just learn psychology, they use psychology to succeed in school and in life. And Norton is going to give you a $15 thank you gift if you take 15 minutes to tour around the book. Just head to intropsych.wwnorton.com/psych sessions.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's that power of story, right? I mean, and to hear someone who lived it it's better than probably any PowerPoint lecture I can manufacture. To hear, those firsthand stories, testimonials are data. I think a lot of times psychologists don't like to think about that, but they're very persuasive and they're qualitative data. And there's a reason why they're used in marketing and advertising so effectively. Yeah. So Blake, we've covered a little bit of the academic history. I love going way back, and so and we'll move forward chronologically here in a minute. So, what was the Blake Nielsen who was the Blake Nielsen in high school? Were you a band geek? Were you an athlete? Were you president of the chess team? Were you in drama, debate, foreign languages? What was your gig?
Yeah, I was the type of student that I wanted to be involved in lots of different things. And a lot of that encouragement came from my parents. We weren't really given an ultimatum, but the way that the story was shared with us is that, Nielsens are involved. And so what that involvement looked like was a sport every single season in which a sport was offered. So I was on the football team. I was on the basketball team. I was on the track team. I was also with our show choir. I was a part of theater. I did one-act plays. I was involved in some of the musicals that we did. I was involved, and that was really a lot of it was from my folks really making sure that we stayed plugged in. I grew up in a small rural farming village in south central Nebraska. Oxford, Nebraska is where I grew up, and I think my parents looked at, where we were at geographically, realized that it takes about an hour to get to a mall or some of these big box stores. And so they really saw value in having their kids plugged in. And my lessons that I learned on the football field, translated into lessons that I had in the classroom, that I did with musicals, what it was like to work with a team, how to, create a space for leadership, things like that, lend themselves to nice stories I can share nowadays. And then also I can surprise folks that, I was somebody that had one of those sparkly vests and special shiny shoes and was out there with the show choir.
Absolutely. So do you have siblings?
I have 3 younger siblings. Yep.
So you're the oldest of 4.
That's right. 2 brothers below me and then a youngest sister.
The youngest of the 4 is a sister.
That's right.
Okay. And then tell me the age gaps, if you would.
Sure. So the brother below me is about a year and 9 months or so separated. I have then another brother below him that is a similar gap, a year and 9 months separated. And then my sister, let's see here, doing some quick math in my head, maybe
math.
7 years, below
7 years,
give or take.
So the interesting thing, and I'll try not to go too much on a tangent. So your sister had different parents than the 3 boys. Because that 7-year gap is, and it's 7 years, but it's more like 9.5, maybe 10 years for you, if I'm doing the family math correctly. And so it's interesting. I like that question because, if you talk to her experiences with your mom and dad, odds are they're different than your experiences with your mom and dad.
Yeah. She obviously had a period of time where she was the only kid in the house. I don't really remember what that was like. As early as I can remember, there's always been somebody else there, other roommates that I've had.
Right. Exactly. So and I think you've kind of hinted at the answer. Growing up, was it, will Blake go to college, or was it, what college will Blake go to?
It was always the point of going to college, and my dad had one of those cheesy quotes that he often reminded us of, set your ambitions high, and it would often fall in line of, shoot for the stars, because if you don't reach them, you'll at least hit the moon, right? The cheesy dad phrase that you're supposed to say to get your kids inspired. But he was always pushing us to challenge ourselves, and it wasn't always college, and that was kind of the expectation. He came grew up as a first generation college student. He knew what the value was of getting an education. I mentioned rural farming village in Nebraska. He was, somebody that he remembers vividly, his dad sitting him down and saying, like, you're going to have an opportunity that I didn't get to have. You're going to go get a degree.
Wow.
And you're not going to, stay on the family farm. So I had that to follow. I had my parents were small business owners, entrepreneurs. So you want to get a crash course on what it's like to work with people. I grew up working in a grocery store, sacking groceries, checking folks out with their grocery items as they went through the aisle, getting up early in the mornings, with my folks a couple times a week during the summer months and helping them unload the ice cream, all those products that you get to go walk through with your grocery cart and pick off one by one. I was the one that was helping, my dad bulk remove and restock on the shelves. That's right.
Well, and Blake, I think there's a pattern emerging for me is that your work ethic was instilled early and repeated often. I mean, from high school through working with your parents' store, through college, I would suspect, even with all the things that you're doing on your campus today. I know in addition to being an associate professor, don't you also run Columbia's Center for Teaching and Learning?
Yeah, I'm our director for our Center for Teaching and Learning on campus, which takes, half of my time out of the classroom to organize the center. And it's one of those things that I've really discovered is another form of teaching, right? It's just a different audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did look at the Columbia website earlier today for you, and I had to keep scrolling to see all the classes that you've taught since you've been there. And I think I stopped counting at 16 different courses.
And I'm going to be adding a new one this upcoming semester.
Of course you are.
Teaching a new class. And some of that has been by choice. I'm, somebody that is curious and wanting to expand my understanding of psychology, but some of that is also came by necessity. Hey, we have a colleague that's going on sabbatical, or we have, different leadership opportunities where people's time is getting bought out, and we have this opening. Will you consider? And I've always been like, yes, that is an absolute excitement for me to be able to jump into that.
So tell me a little bit about number of majors at Columbia and number of psychology faculty.
Majors is a tough question to answer based on the demographic of our students. We have a couple different venues in which we operate out of. Yes, we're a small liberal arts institution. We have a brick and mortar, traditional setup in Columbia, Missouri, but we also have students that are in our Columbia College global venue and our asynchronous online venue. And those numbers vary. I think right now we're about the 9,000 students, give or take, as an entire institution. But here on the day campus where I operate out of, we have about 800 to 900 students. It kind of fluctuates based on the enrollment year. So we have students coming in. Okay. So to answer your question, the larger one is I'm not sure about the asynchronous and the Columbia College global pieces because those fluctuate quite a bit. But I do know that it's often one of the top 5 most popular majors at our institution whenever we're graduating students. On the day campus, I would say as far as number of majors and minors, I'll even throw some of those in there. We're hitting anywhere from the 50, give or take, majors, which for us, being in the position that we're in, that's a great number right now. And then minors, I would say we're maybe double that. Yeah, it's real easy to get a minor and real marketable to say that you minored in psychology and applying some of those skills when you head out.
And then how many full-time faculty members?
We have 5 psychology faculty members.
That sounds proportional.
Yeah, on the day campus. And then we have a remote colleague that is based out of Chicago, but she covers a lot of our asynchronous classes and then is actually teaching a class for us synchronously this spring.
Okay. So I can't do all the math that quickly in my head, but it strikes me as remarkable that you can have classes from about 12 to 17 students. Given that scenario,
we love to implement our courses into the general education requirements, right? Yeah. We love the Psych 101 representation just to give students a foot in the door and understanding some of those important concepts. We also find that our classes are really attractive to students. They want to learn about what it means to be in love, what it means to relate to others, how to think critically or quantitatively. So those are exciting topics that, students like to explore.
Well, I do know that students at small private liberal arts colleges tend to love to explore those. I think the profile of the state institution student is oftentimes different. They're not going to get that. We have 800 majors and 14 full-time faculty. And so I'm going to teach a capstone class next semester with 130 students enrolled. And that's not the national model in psychology capstone courses,
No.
It's a seminar with 10 to 15 people sitting around a table, chatting twice a week.
Right. And that's the fun part. And really one of the reasons why I've self-selected into this line of work right? When I was, growing up in rural Nebraska, my options were, where do I want to go? Because I've known these people, practically my whole life, and I'm quite familiar with a small class setting. I had 30 people in my graduating class, right? So I knew what it was like to be in that small environment. But then I immediately went to big school, and went on the job market trying to figure out where to go after my graduate studies. That's why places like Monmouth College and Columbia College jumped up top of my list. I wanted to get back to the environment.
Absolutely. Blake, I think you're probably one of the most energetic people that I know, because in addition to serving your IRB on campus and you're directing the Center for Teaching and Learning, I'll bet you're playing other roles on campus. But I also know about at least one of your roles off of campus, and that's for the annual conference on teaching. Will you tell our listeners a bit about what you do for ACT and STP?
Absolutely. And I'm going to throw in a new wrinkle in there
Please.
as well. By the time of this release, perhaps will be on more folks' radar than it is now. My position in the annual conference on teaching came by working with the wonderful Lindsay Maslin back when Lindsay was serving as director. I was a steering committee member. I was one of those folks that was early in my career wanting to get a foot in the door, wanting to serve STP in a way where it's creating this space for people to be able to connect with one another, but also have these amazing thoughts and ideas in this moment of connection, like the story I just shared about you and Denver, giving me a new pedagogical tool that they can take back into their classroom. And that for me I was all for it. And really that seed got planted back in Denver, where I was sitting in the computer lab in our hotel, and this individual kind of rushed in, and they had this nice little bow tie, and they started to stuff some paper into this printer, and they were trying to print more copies. And I looked at this individual and I thought, gosh, I just want to help him. He just seems like he's trying to put on this conference and really host it. And so the moment for me seeing Jordan Troisi, it just kind of looking at the inner workings of what it means to host a conference, I oddly then just thought, I want to do that.
Psych Sessions is proud to partner with Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters, and these days, digital content matters more than ever. Macmillan Learning's Achieve elevates interactive teaching and learning with an extraordinary range of online course content in a powerful yet easy-to-use platform. Interactive ebooks, innovative assessments, engaging videos and activities, helpful instructor resources. Achieve brings it all together and makes it easy for you to find what you need and what you want. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psych sessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning.
And so that was my inspiration to put an application in. I was so grateful that Lindsay, plucked me from that applicant pool and asked me to join in as a steering committee member. I served in that role for a couple of years. And then when the position became available, I applied for the assistant director position for the conference, which involved providing some on the ground help. But really the main focus of that position was to help organize our online programming. Mm-hmm. And that's had a couple different models throughout the years. It basically gained enough traction and enough momentum that it is now spun off into its own conference. And that's my alluding earlier of what's to come. The annual conference on teaching online, which I previously was the assistant director to, has now become STP's virtual conference on teaching, or VCT. And my position as the assistant director for ACT has now shifted into the director of VCT. And so I've been busy getting that built out. We got our keynote speakers, we got our workshops, we got our lineup. So all of that is to come. And hopefully by the time of this release, folks will have some ideas of who they're going to learn from in that space.
Well, and it makes sense because for the most part, I'm guessing it's a different audience. I mean, many of us are very fortunate that we have the funding from our institution to travel to a physical location, but to be able to provide that online and virtually, I think meets a need. I mean, I think in some ways it's parallel to the podcast, right? I mean, you don't have to travel to a physical location to listen to a podcast. It's available somewhat on demand. And I would imagine the VCT conference presentations are on demand, once you've paid for your registration and all the things. And I think we all learned that after the pandemic, this was an important modality too.
Gives us an opportunity to also connect with folks that, well, one, we're not going to conferences and brushing up, shoulders against just sitting at some of these talks. But I had folks that were joining the annual conference on teaching online the last several years that were from India. We had a contingent of faculty that joined from Australia. I was learning from some of my peers out in some of the Pacific Islands or even in parts of Europe that it's just amazing for me to expand my horizons and learn from folks that are interacting with students that have very different demands. And still, we were using the same language that psychology, lends itself to. So that is another really interesting opportunity that folks get whenever they join virtual conferences like VCT.
So the newly minted VCT is clearly on your horizon. You're serving as director for the Center of Teaching and Learning at Columbia. What else is on your plate these days, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure. So I serve as our parliamentarian at Columbia College.
For Faculty Senate?
For our faculty association, you bet. So I'm in that room making sure motions are called and that we are following a order in which we are conducting our business. So that's one of those fun roles for me, just service that I participate with at the institution. But beyond that, a lot of my busyness and things haven't been academic projects. They haven't been things that I've been invited to, and I've been invited to, submit, chapter proposals and things like that, but what really has been taking up the most of my attention is being a new dad. And that has been exciting, exhilarating, exhausting, all those things that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and have very intentionally started to dial things back in some of my professional spaces, just because these are periods of time, at least in my daughter's life right now, where she is at such a fun age. I'm never going to get those back. And so I'm trying to be as, if I can, put some air quotes around this, as undercommitted, whatever that might look like, as I can be, just because I want to make sure that I'm not missing that.
So a couple things here. First off, how old is your daughter?
She turns 2 in January.
Okay. First off, I don't think the word undercommitted could ever describe you. You might feel it in your bones, and of course that's okay. But trust me, all the things you're doing that you've done are not overcommitted. If you look at the national audience of psychology faculty members, trust me, you're in the 85th percentile or higher. Okay. So even being undercommitted in air quotes. Secondly, and I'm sure you've heard this before, no one has ever said on their deathbed, I wish I spent less time with my 2-year-old daughter. I wish I'd spent more time working. I mean, people just don't say that when they're reflecting on their life. And so, I'm a father of a daughter and a father of a son. And, my limited experience tells me you cannot overinvest in your own children. So good for you, Blake. Good for you.
Well, and a lot of that advice came from my peers in this space.
Of course.
I remember having some professional opportunities that were presenting themselves to me, and being at ACT years ago and talking to my colleagues of, hey, what should I do? You've navigated this before. How did you handle it? And that's what, this podcast provides. That's what our wonderful teaching community provides, is an amazing, sounding board to be able to get some feedback from folks and really hear from people that have lived it and know what it actually is like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I Bethany Fleck has been on the podcast a couple of times, and the first time she was on, we talked about her role as a new mother and the guilt that she feels. And it was really poignant. It was one of these episodes I end up crying at the end, which happens every now and again. She was just being so raw and unfiltered. And then the second time Bethany was on, we were talking about the death of her mother and how she was struggling with that. And so, I do appreciate that we get this chance to talk about these things. And obviously there are people and events in our lives that are bigger than our careers. And that I do appreciate that on the podcast from time to time, we get to celebrate those things, whether it's happiness or sadness. We can commiserate together or we can celebrate together.
I think for me as an early career professional, I'm now at that threshold where I think I just flipped over into the mid-career phase where, based on some of the definitions that STP uses, but early career, I remember really coming to psych sessions and getting that feedback, listening and learning from some of the folks that came before me. And I know, listeners that have been listening to this podcast for a long time, recently they perhaps have learned a thing or two about your future plans. It seems like every podcast, there has to be some subtle, if not subtle, hint about forthcoming retirements and what end of career decisions look like. And even for me at this stage, it has been so helpful to be reflective of what do I want that time to look like? What do I, think about what work after my academic career is over will look like? And so those are some of the fun things that I'm getting from the members of this community, this podcast, and just really helping me game plan what the next several years of my career and even what the end of my career is going to look like.
Yeah. And I think it's very cogent to be thinking about that. And I probably should have started thinking about it sooner. It's funny, I started smiling when you said I've been talking about this because I realized I have been talking about it a lot in the more recent episodes because it is on my mind. And we've had a pocket of episode releases lately where I've talked to people who have just retired or been retired for a while. And so I'm always trying to eke out the goodness of other people's experiences and how they dealt with it. You've been doing it long enough and I've been doing it long enough where, my self-perception, the number one thing I think of is I'm a college professor. Yes, I'm a husband. Yes, I'm a father. Yes, I have a delightful puppy at home. There's lots of things going on there. I have wonderful adult children, amazing wife. But at the end of the day, I'm a college professor. And in about 18 months, I'm going to stop being one. So then what fills that gap? And so I think you're very wise, Blake, to be thinking about it now and thinking about what's my arc? What's the arc of my career look like? And you were talking earlier about underperforming, which I really don't think you're doing, but undercommitting. And a different way to think about that, I've seen people at conferences present like they have a no committee or they have a no folder. So you get this really cool opportunity. I'm going to be the director of VCT. And some people have this committee of people they really trust and they go to and they ask, what do you think? Should I do this or not? Because when we all say yes too quickly, we get over our heads. At least I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of the lessons and the things I've learned from this community, from listening to you, listening to Garth on this podcast, or some of the spinoffs that folks have held on psych sessions, Lindsay Maslin shared with me something that's really stuck with me is that, your no in certain situations is your yes in another context.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I've become a lot more selective at this point in my career, saying yes to things like VCT is a great example. It's going to be an amazing experience. Folks that join us in February, they're going to have a great time. They're going to learn a ton from Regan and Elizabeth that are keynoting it for us. But it's one of those things that I had to think long and hard about, the commitments that are going to be involved, the emotional investment I'm going to have to make in this, because for folks that have been behind the scenes, there's a lot of moving pieces that go up to organizing a conference. And I know that you know this based on some of your RMPA work, that, people, you like people to have a good time, and you like for them not to see all the fires that you had to put out leading up to and during the programming that took place. So I said yes, and I was really selective to that because of the people I get to work with. I get an opportunity to work alongside Garth in the annual conference on teaching. I still have a component of my VCT role is involved helping out with ACT, which is amazing. Jordan Tracy is the VP of programming, for STP. So I get to work with Jordan in that space. And so to be able to work with Jordan, to be able to have worked with Lindsay and then currently work with Garth, I'm getting the trifecta of an amazing group of individuals to surround myself with and really glean all their insights and knowledge.
Absolutely. Blake, I want to be respectful of time. Thinking about today, thinking about our conversation, was there anything in your head that you said, oh, I want to make sure that I talk to Eric about X? This is your chance now to solve for X.
Well, there are so many things that I'd love to follow up with you about, and maybe that's something we can talk about offline, or if we do bump into each other at a conference.
Or we can do a part 2 if you want to.
That'd be great. The things that I would love to just kind of brainstorm with you in this space right now is advice. You are somebody that many people in this teaching community look to for advice. You and Garth and this podcast put amazing advice out there for folks, especially earlier in their career, navigating steps. What would you recommend for somebody mid-career? And I know I'm turning it around a little bit and now asking you an interview question, but as somebody that perhaps is transitioning from early career to mid-career, pieces of advice that you would give to me as I'm thinking about what the mid-career phase of my academic career is going to look like?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing that comes to mind, I was just talking about it with my capstone students yesterday, in fact, in class, is that work-life balance is dynamic, meaning that, we might envision work-life balance as a 50-50 balancing, and it's been perfect equilibrium. But I think if you dig into the literature, the notion is that work-life balance is dynamic, meaning there will be points in your career where your personal life is going to have to take precedent. Whether you're a new father, whether the death of a parent, a divorce in your world. When I went through my divorce, I know that my academic life suffered because I was concentrating so much on my personal life. And so this acceptance that it's probably never going to be a perfect 50-50 balance between work and life, but it's dynamic in that hopefully over time, it'll even out if you want it to. There's also been times in my life where my personal life was on cruise control and I could just dive into my academic life. And I had a chance to write books, or I had a chance to give talks, or I had a chance to be an editor of a journal and all the things. And so the other thing I guess I would say is that, and it's totally okay to disagree with this, I think you can have it all, but not at the same time. I don't think ever in my career I've had it all at the same time. I've had it all across 37 years of doing it, but I never had it in year 16. And I couldn't say, oh, I have it all. So I think you can get it all if that's important, but I know very few people who can do it all at the same time.
And that's helpful for me to hear, and I hope for our community to hear, because there have been so many times, even in my career, even recently, where that imposter syndrome sneaks in and you hear the whispers of you're not doing enough, or you're not enough in this space for all these reasons. I had the privilege of going out to a conference in California for, educational developers. And Chris Hackala was on the conference steering committee helping organize the event. And Chris is one of those people that if you've met Chris, he's one of the most authentic, genuine, friendly, people that is just a genuinely kind person. Not necessarily, because there are nice people and there are kind people. And Chris is just this kind person. And Chris mentioned to me, in just in this moment of honesty, and I've heard him say this several times in larger settings. So I'm not like giving you the inside scoop of something that was just between him and I, where he was talking about how while hosting this big conference and having all the eyes on him when he was up on center stage at various points, where that imposter syndrome still sneaks in. And I just took a step back and thought, like, Chris, you are at the pinnacle of your career right now, and you are still trying to tamp down the whispers of imposter syndrome. So I think just hearing that from folks that are in late career, that maybe even in mid-career, right, that is something that you will encounter, and how to navigate that.
Especially if you try to stretch your skill set and do new things. I mean, Garth and I started the podcast in November of 2017, 9 years ago now. And we both had imposter syndrome starting a podcast because I'd never done it. I'd never interviewed people. And if you go back and listen to the first, I'm going to say 50 episodes, they're rough. They are rough because you learn these new skills that, 240 episodes in, we both now have that we didn't have in the beginning. I had total imposter syndrome starting a podcast. But you just do it long enough, and what is it? Fake it till you make it, right? And then it's a skill that does develop over time. And so, I do think that imposter syndrome also keeps us humble. And something that you mentioned at the very beginning there, that social comparison is something that I like to think as you get older, you do less of. I remember getting to Boise State 30 years ago and hearing my colleagues out in the hallway brainstorming about some new study they were going to do together, and sitting in my office as an assistant professor going, oh my God, they're so smart, and they're going to do this really cool study, and I'm not part of it. And why me or why not me? And as I've gotten older, for the most part, I can tune out that social comparison. And I don't have to publish as much as Regan Gurung. I don't have to give world-class talks like Susan Nolan and Dave Myers. I get to be me, and most days that's enough.
Well, yes. And, you being you has brought, this podcast in the feeds of all the folks in this lovely teaching community that we're a part of. I know I shared this memory with you back in Portland. Well, Psych Sessions had one of those opportunities to have a panel discussion.
Yeah.
And I was an audience member, and I often will throw this podcast on when I'm out doing yard work. And so a lot of my memories of this podcast are literally me and a rake with a big pile of leaves, thinking about, something interesting that my colleagues said. And, those are my psych session moments, right? Where I can think about, that comment or that sub series that y'all hosted. And this is, you just being Eric allows us to have those psych session moments and really to help grow professionally.
Well, Blake, you've been very kind, and I thank you for it. It's funny that you talk about when you're raking the leaves. For Jane Hallinan, it's when she's tending her blueberries. That's when she tends to listen to Psych Sessions. And so occasionally I'll get a blueberry related comment to something that happened on the podcast. And so I do want to be respectful of time. I'm going to do my best to give you the last word. What would you like to end on today, my friend?
Gratitude. Just gratitude for being a part of this community. I remember being that early career psychologist, absolutely overwhelmed, not a clue on what I was about to do in my position, and being able to listen to my peers at the conferences I've attended, the podcasts I listen to, hear how they talk to students, hear how they designed assignments, being able to just receive the generosity from this amazing community that is STP has been so overwhelmingly positive that I cannot think of a finer community, just a community be a part of, let alone a teaching community. So for folks that, aren't a member of STP or a part of STB, I encourage you to become a member. There's so much value that comes a part of it. And then getting involved. I think my joys and one of my whys of why I do what I do is helping people connect. And oftentimes that's being connected to something that's bigger than yourself. And I love helping early career professionals get plugged into STP. Lots of membership opportunities. I encourage folks to do that. I went down that path. I have some amazing friendships and just great colleagues I get to work with through my time in that. And it's one of those things that's intimidating to put yourself out there. You may not get that position that you'd try out for that first time. And that's okay, right? The value of the exercise is not always getting the position, but being vulnerable, being brave, putting yourself out there, and then, just being open and willing to keep an eye out for opportunities. One of my favorite quotes is, chance favors the prepared mind, right? And Louis Pasteur, somebody who is better known for pasteurizing milk, perhaps, left me with that comment where I think about, I often have to go into settings with a prepared mind, because those moments that happen, if I'm not prepared and I'm not ready to put myself out there to try to apply my skill set, I'm going to miss them. So really, having those moments pop up like VCT and just being prepared to do it. So the connections, this community, the gratitude, those are all things I want to land on. And if I could just put a shameless plug in there for the virtual conference on teaching, February 19th and 20th. Come learn from Regan Gurung and Elizabeth Yoshammer. They're going to be talking about teaching like a champ and some of the things that educators are facing nowadays. So 2 amazing psychologists, 2 amazing people. I think you'll have a great time and learn a lot and grow as an educator.
Blake, thank you for your time and thank you for all your kind words. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Eric. Thanks for inviting me.